Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really keen to share with you some research that's underway right now. And the title of my presentation is the title of my presentation is just reflective in the paper that I'm working on right now, and that's the urgent need for cyclist safety research in an AI-enabled mobility future. However, the main heading here is AI has a bike problem. And as you will soon see, I'm going to be explaining a little bit about what the literature shows and what some of my findings are. So without further ado, let's get started. I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction about myself. My name is Alex Gaio. I'm a PhD student here at Trinity College in Dublin. I just started 5 months ago. And the focus of my research is on autonomous vehicles and cycling. So in this presentation, what I'm just going to do is we're going to cover off a couple things. The first thing we're going to cover off is a little bit about the relationship between bikes and autonomous vehicles, or I'll be using AVs throughout this presentation. Then I'm going to take a look and we'll overview some of the literature, and we'll then jump into some key findings and some recurring themes that I've pulled from the literature. And I'm also going to jump into some takeaways at the end of the presentation, and then I'll take any questions that you might have. So the findings that I'm presenting here are part of a literature review paper on cyclists and autonomous vehicles. And really the key message is that there's a little bit of a lack of research, and there needs to be a little bit more focus on bikes and AI research, particularly around AI-enabled mobility and autonomous vehicles. So the way that I'm approaching this is, autonomous vehicles are pretty good at sensing their environment, and we have a good understanding of how the sensing suite is reflected in an autonomous vehicle. This is an example of a YOLO detection suite, or a you only look once. And what it does is it just puts bounding boxes around each of the objects that are recognized by the vehicle. So this is the perception that we understand of an autonomous vehicle. However, when we think of other road users, say cyclists, for example, we don't really understand what cyclist senses are telling them about AVs. There's surprisingly little research on this topic. So enter the work that I'm doing. And really, one of the biggest takeaways that I have found in the literature is that pedestrians and cyclists need to be treated as distinct entities. A lot of the time, they're lumped in together as VRUs, or vulnerable road users. So what I'm just trying to say here is them being distinct entities, they shouldn't be lumped together because they have distinct qualities. They shouldn't be generalized as vulnerable road users, and research and data sets where cyclists are the primary focus are lacking. So a lot of the work and the research that existing right now, or at least some older data sets that are used to train artificial intelligence, are lacking quality data on cyclists. Another thing that I wanted to hammer home is that while 16 papers did distinctly identify cyclists as unique entities, 11 cited that there was a weakness in cycling research in relation to autonomous vehicles, and a further 7 cited that there was a shortfall in cyclist detection. And really what it comes down to is pedestrians and cyclists are not the same when it comes to capabilities, their behavior, their movement, and what needs to be reacted to on the street. So it's very important that they be treated as distinct entities. And when we think of a cyclist and the particular nature of what an individual can do on 2 wheels, there are a number of different things we need to take into consideration, in addition to the detection of cyclists and bicycles in and of itself. And I would further say that pedestrians and cyclists are not alike, but pedestrians are also not the same as a person on a bike by itself, and a person pushing a bike. And the reason why I show these 3 distinct different situations that involve a bicycle is that a lot of the time they're treated the same when they aren't necessarily the same thing. So this is another thing that detection is having a hard time with. The next thing I want to do is just cover off some lit review. You don't need to dig deep into this web. It's just to illustrate some of the complexity. The literature that I've been looking through was searched through, and I arrived at 34 articles that were directly related to the research that I was trying to carry out, and I was able to segment it out into 3 themes. and 6 sub-themes based on those themes. And just because of the compressed time today, we're just going to focus in on those 3 things. And those 3 top-level themes are the AV cyclist implications, AV cyclist infrastructure, and AI and cyclist safety, which are further broken down into more granular areas. And today we're just going to focus on the AV cyclist implications area of this, and particularly look at some key findings and takeaways relating to the perspective of the autonomous vehicle, the perspective of the cyclist, and then AV and cyclist communication. So one of the key findings in the literature that came up a number of times is that there's still a need for separated bike infrastructure, and that cyclists aren't necessarily going to be more confident as soon as the magical autonomous vehicle becomes commonplace. And this has been carried out through studies that involve user choice or stated preference research. And it's clear that either there needs to be a big education piece, or the technology needs to be proven to cyclists in order for them to feel more comfortable. But as it stands right now, there's going to be a need for separated bike infrastructure for vulnerable road users. And in addition to that, advocacy is going to be needed for those vulnerable road users, because if we don't want to repeat a situation where some road users are excluded from using the infrastructure that exists, for example, in past centuries where pedestrians and cyclists have been pushed to the fringes of our transportation infrastructure, we're going to need to start talking about vulnerable road user advocacy early in the onset. Another thing that scholars have risen the concern for is the potential for a future hostile environment where vulnerable road users are kind of course, pushed to the sides. And because of the nature of autonomous vehicles, knowing that, at least right now, the unpredictability of some pedestrians and cyclists could impede on their ability to operate efficiently, this could create an environment for car-dominated infrastructure. And this is a picture of Dublin, just to show you that right now, even with human-operated cars, we have a situation where we're fencing in our vulnerable road users. Another thing is that cyclists lack trust for AVs based on the research that exists right now. And given that autonomous vehicles may detect and respond differently to vulnerable road users, particularly cyclists, their behavior may change when AVs are commonplace. So there is really little that we can do to understand how cyclists will react or interact with autonomous vehicles until there is actually research done on the actual physical interaction between cyclists and autonomous vehicles outside of purely a simulation, although models and simulations have shown that behavior may be different. So some key takeaways. This is what I hammered home, or at least what I wanted to hammer home at the beginning, is that there's really a need to focus more research on cyclists in particular. When we're talking about vulnerable road users, I did a deep dive into all the different literature that exists, and there's a lack between cyclists and autonomous vehicles, and in extension, artificial intelligence. In future research, detailed data sets are going to be needed, although there are already more coming online right now, but more research needs to be done in order to understand cyclist behavior. And in particular, and this is what primarily concerns me in my PhD research, is how cyclists perceive AVs, their opinions, how it'll impact their travel behavior, and what sorts of infrastructure needs they will depend on in a world where artificial intelligence and AI-enabled mobility will be commonplace. That is everything for today. Thanks for your attention. If you would like to connect, I'm happy to connect with you offline or online, and my contact details are available for you here. Thanks for your attention.